Welcome to On the Vineyard, a weekly podcast from the Vineyard Gazette Media Group on Martha's Vineyard. I'm senior writer Louisa Huffstadter, sitting in for your regular host, publisher Monica Brady-Myeroff. On the Vineyard is sponsored by Crane Appliance. Summer is in full swing on the island this month, and so is the weather. We've had sun, fog, clouds, and thunderstorms this week, sometimes all on the same day. It all goes to show the old New England saying is as true as ever. If you don't like the weather, just wait a minute. If you do like art, rainy days are just as good as sunny ones for exploring the island's many galleries from Edgartown all the way to Aquinnah. This week I went to a reception for the current show at Louisa Gould Gallery in Vineyard Haven, where the internationally known sculptor Gwen Marcus is showing large and small bronzes alongside Tisbury artist Sean Roach's colorful paintings of waves breaking on island beaches. I also discovered that one of my favorite curators, Tanya Augustinos, has opened a pop-up gallery right across from Edgartown Books in the former Nell clothing shop on Main Street. That's where I'm heading the next time it rains. The sound of our historic press printing the Vineyard Gazette means it's time to go upstairs to the newsroom and check in with Editor-in-Chief Bill Evell. Bill, let's talk about what's in this week's newspaper.
Turning now to Louisa Huffstadter, who has a story on an important retirement at Polly Hill Arboretum in West Tisbury. Tim Boland, who has shepherded the Arboretum for over 20 years as executive director, will be stepping down next summer. Louisa had a chance to stroll the grounds with Tim and talk to him about his important tenure there.
Yes, Bill, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Tim Boland, actually not sitting down with Tim Boland, but mostly strolling the grounds with Tim Boland and occasionally taking a seat just to talk about what he's seen in his many years there. He actually came to Polly Hill in 2002 and then became the executive director in 2004, and he worked there while Polly Hill, the founder of the Arboretum, was still alive. And they'd actually met earlier in life, he told me, when he was about 24 years old, delivering a paper at a botanical conference in Philadelphia that included talking about the holly plants that Ms. Hill had been propagating on the vineyard. She was an amateur botanist, but became very widely respected in the second half of her 100-year lifespan for her work with plants and for introducing some 80 new species. They became reacquainted when he came from his job as a director of horticulture in Chicago to come to the vineyard and work at Polly Hill, first as a curator and later as executive director. And so he absorbed a lot of the place's lore and philosophy directly from Polly Hill herself. He announced his retirement this week, but it won't go into effect until September of next year because Tim said he wanted to give the Board of Trustees of Polly Hill a good long time to find the right person, find housing for the person will probably be part of it as well, and that takes time, and just not to rush into anything because he said that is the Polly Hill way.
For our listeners, some who I'm sure have been to the Arboretum, some who haven't, it's just an incredible place to walk around, but of course it is a lot more than just beauty. And Tim helped develop a lot of programs that are wide-reaching, not just around the island, but around the country. You want to explain some of the things that have happened over the course of the last 20 years?
Yes, Bill, Tim said he was proud of some of the things that he's achieved while he was there, including the employee housing that went into commission a year or two ago. They've got 2 dwellings there and the option of building a third. One of the first things that he did was oversee the redevelopment of Polly Hill's old farmhouse, which is now a research library, contains a climate-controlled vault for preserved plant samples. It's a wonderful little facility, a beautiful research library and reading room. Visiting botanists who give talks at Polly Hill stay there. Tim also worked with donors to build a maintenance building, which the Arboretum had not had, a place for the various caretakers to keep their tools and operate from, and a greenhouse, which opened on Polly Hill's 100th birthday, the year she died.
Yeah, I liked in your article, it really seems from the outside looking in to be a dream job, and of course that's what it turned out to be. As Tim said at the end, that even after he retires, he thinks he'll become one of the volunteers there.
Yes, we were in one of the research rooms while he was giving me a tour of the Arboretum, and he looked over at one of the desks and he said, maybe I'll wind up here doing some projects.
All right, Louisa, thanks so much for that story on a really wonderful steward of the island. Continuing with the theme of retirement, there is another retirement, this one in Vineyard Haven Harbor, that will take place next summer. The Shenandoah, the incredible topsail schooner that everyone loves to see, will have its final run next summer. Addison got a chance to walk around on the Shenandoah and get a tour. Addison, what's the story and what did you see?
Yeah, so on Saturday I went to the Shenandoah with the current owners, Casey Bloom and Ian Ridgway, who are also the co-founders of Ocean Academy, which is an organization that uses the ship to take children on these week-long voyages, kind of teaching them themes of resilience, working together, and also, of course, basic maritime skills and environmental stewardship. I got to go see the boat. It's a fantastic ship. It's built to look like a 19th century sailing vessel. So you have all of these incredible sails, and you've got the winch that they use to help raise them and all of these things. But they just had an inspection with the U.S. Coast Guard that they had to do every 2 years, and it's just gotten to the point where maintaining it logistically and financially is a little too difficult. So next summer is going to be its last time on the water.
Now, Shenandoah has a really long legacy. It first sailed into the harbor in 1964, captained by Robert Douglas. And just to pick up from when you were talking about how its main mission became to take youth out, students into island schools and also summer kids, my son got to do that. It was an incredible week. You're sort of away from any sort of electronics, and at that time, Captain Bob was still shepherding it, and at night he would read them long odes of poetry. His son said it actually helped him fall asleep. But tell us a little bit more about the evolution of Shenandoah.
Sure. So the boat was built in Maine in 1964, sailed into Vineyard Haven Harbor. I got to speak with Phil Hale, who's the former owner of the Martha's Vineyard shipyard, who actually got to see it come in, and it was this amazing thing. Even then, it was the ship that they hadn't seen on the waters in the vineyard for hundreds of years. And from there, Captain Douglas was using it to charter groups of people, adults, kids, anyone. But he really found a love of taking children out on the water. I spoke to Matthew Stackpole, who worked on the boat as a mate, and he said Captain Douglas was always like, give me the kids. They're a lot more willing to, have that sense of adventure and learn than adults are. And so over time, Captain Douglas used both Alabama and Shenandoah to charter a lot of trips for kids. That's actually where Casey and Ian met. They met on Alabama. They both came as students. They started working on the ships, worked their way up to captains. Over time, the focus shifted from anyone to specifically kids, kids from off island. They had a lot of mariner scouts come in, but also vineyard kids, of course, as well, such as your son. But then in 2020, Captain Douglas donated Shenandoah to what's now Martha's Vineyard Ocean Academy, and so they've focused on maintaining that mission to this day.
Yeah, it's just such an incredible part of the story that Ian and Casey were once, fifth grade students aboard the Shenandoah. I love that part. So do they know what's going to happen? So it's going to end its sailing next summer, and what happens next?
So what happens next for the Shenandoah itself is unsure. They're exploring a couple of options, including preserving part of the hull to be an exhibit on the waterfront. They also want to maintain parts of it to use in a new ship. That's their main plan for Ocean Academy, is to build Shenandoah 2, which is actually a design made by Captain Douglas to succeed the Shenandoah. So that's what they're fundraising for right now, is to build a second boat. But in terms of what happens to the Shenandoah itself is still up in the air.
All right. Well, we hope it continues in one way or another. Thanks a lot, Addison.
Of course.
You can find out more about these stories and all the island news in this week's newspaper and on our website, which is free at vineyardgazette.com. Sign up for our e-newsletters, The Broadsheet and Island Time, and we'll deliver our award-winning coverage and best bets on things to do on the vineyard directly to your inbox. Well, we just heard from Addison Antonoff about the schooner Shenandoah, where young people learn how to sail and navigate at sea using traditional methods. In the days before super-accurate global positioning systems came into use, mariners like the legendary Chilmark fisherman Jimmy Morgan relied on some decidedly low-tech equipment to chart their positions on the water.
They didn't have a Loran, they didn't have a GPS and all that, so you had to go by what you had. When I first started fishing with Tom Tilton, he had the compass, the sounding lead, and the alarm clock. That's how we navigated. Say we left from Menemsha, get outside of the breakwater. It was hazy or thick fog. He'd set that alarm clock the time he left, say 6 o'clock, set it. And then he knew it was about half an hour to the bridge buoy. If he was going off of Noman, about a half an hour. He looked at the clock, and when it was half an hour, he'd stop, and if we hadn't made the buoy, then he'd stop the boat and we'd listen for it. That's how we navigated.
Thank you to the Martha's Vineyard Museum for this archival audio, which was taken from a 2018 interview by Lindsay Lee. Jimmy Morgan died later that year at the age of 94. Our theme music is from island composer and musician Michael Hayden, and this week's podcast was edited by Margaret Evans. If you like our show, please follow On the Vineyard so you won't miss an episode. Thanks to our sponsor, Crane Appliance. Their experts listen to your needs and help you choose the right appliances for your home. Crane Appliance, they call the Cape and Islands home. I'm Louisa Hofstadter. Thanks for joining us on The Vineyard. We'll be back next week with another podcast, and you can catch up on past episodes anytime at vineyardgazette.com.